Good evening and welcome to the Job Search Solution, the radio program where we talk about looking for a job, changing jobs, changing careers, hiring. And as always, we begin with a prayer. Dear God, grant us thy peace and thy mercy, thy will be done. Last week, we were talking about the mistakes that employers make in the interviewing and hiring process. We were supposed to cover 5 of them, and we only got to 4. We discussed that most hiring authorities don't have a real good idea of what they're looking for in a candidate. They have a very unrealistic idea about what's on the market and what's available on the market. They have way too many people involved in the interviewing and hiring process, primarily because they don't want to make a mistake. And they think the more people we have involved in the interviewing process, the more likely we are not to make a mistake. Well, that's not necessarily true. And in fact, studies have shown that one person doing a hiring is just as good as 3 or 4 people doing the hiring. But you're not going to convince people of that. Nobody wants to make a mistake, so they have a whole bunch of people involved in it. And then their process takes way too long. 4 times last month, we had clients that were in the process of trying to hire a candidate and took just way too long because their process was ridiculously long. One of them carried out over a 4-week period of time. And everybody had all kinds of excuses and reasons as to why it would happen. But the candidate wound up taking another job. The process takes way too long. In fact, what happened was the candidate ended up interviewing at another organization that interviewed and hired him in a matter of 3 days. The fifth and one big mistake that most employers make is that they have very poor interviewing techniques. If you're a candidate, you know you're in a poor interviewing situation when a hiring authority or interviewing authority says something like, well, tell me about yourself. Look, we have a plan here for it. We suggest that every employer ask every candidate exactly the same questions. Take very good notes, especially in an initial interview. If that initial interview is carried out over a period, you interview 4 or 5 candidates over a 2 or 3 week period of time. By the time you get to that 5th candidate, you don't remember very much about the first candidate. Most people won't admit that. But if they take really good notes and use exactly the same system in interviewing candidates, in every one of them, they won't make that mistake. But they have very poor interviewing techniques, and it ends up showing up, and they end up hiring a candidate that they really, really like, but may not necessarily have the skills of what they need. The 6th mistake is that hiring authorities either interview or don't interview candidates based on a resume. Now, look, there are very good resume writers that aren't very good professionals. Now, I'll admit that if you're looking for an engineer and you get the resume of an accountant, you probably shouldn't interview the candidate. I get that. But if a candidate is even reasonably within reason, capable of doing your job based on your resume, pick up the phone and spend 5 to 10 minutes with him, just to be him or her, just to be safe. We had an employer the other day that said, send me your 3 best candidates. How do I know what's best? Now, I can send you 4 or 5 qualified candidates that are qualified to do your job, but the difference between who you hire and who you don't comes down to personality. How well do they mesh with you and the rest of the people in the organization? It's like telling somebody which person is best to marry. There's no way of knowing that. It's a personal thing. So if a person fits within reason, it's better to be more inclusive than it is to be exclusive. And coming up with the idea of only interviewing 3 candidates is not a really good way to do it, because that's just not giving yourself enough options for which to choose. The seventh mistake people make is either not interviewing enough or interviewing too many candidates. I worked with a client not too long ago that said, well, we've interviewed 26 people and we just haven't found the right one yet. I absolutely guarantee you there was somebody in that 26 people, of those 26 people, that could have done the job. They just don't really know what they're looking for. They've interviewed so many people, they're mesmerized by it. And then they come up with the idea of, well, this one I just last interviewed isn't as good as the one I interviewed the first time. I didn't hire that one, so I probably shouldn't hire this one. They're so confused they don't know. And then, as I mentioned in the mistake before, they interview too few. They interview two candidates and then want to hire one. These kinds of mistakes can be easily overcome and easily dealt with if a hiring authority really pays attention to what they're doing and follows the guidelines. All right, we're going to take a short break. Stay tuned. This is Tony Bashir with the Job Search Solution.